All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us this afternoon on how to navigate data and how to succeed, how financial services succeed in an AI era. I'd like to first start with the acknowledgement to the country, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So we are DS. And who is DS? We are a company that believes in creating positive impact with technology. We've been in business for about 20 years and counting, and we work with all types of organizations from ideas to startups to scale ups, enterprises. Typically, we do product development, custom software, and hardware solutions using emerging tech to solve business problems. We also have expertise in building solutions with machine learning, generative AI, and a lot of data technology. Before we go any further and I introduce the panelists, if you have any questions that may come up, along this webinar, here's a Slido link for you. Feel free to scan it and ask questions anytime during this webinar. While you would have scanned that and perhaps got Slido open, let's look at all the panelists that we are meeting today on this webinar. I'll start with Matt Gerries. Matt is a principal consultant at DS. He's been working with 15 years of experience, a seasoned full stack engineer and a cloud architect. He has a proven record of delivering robust, scalable solutions across various industries. Most recently, Matt's been working with customers in the financial sector and has been instrumental in integrating cutting-edge behavioral biometrics to combat fraudulent activity. Welcome, Matt. We are very keen and excited to hear your thoughts in today's webinar. Next up, we have
Kavita
Karwar, a principal product and delivery consultant at DS. A self-professed data enthusiast, she is dedicated to creating value where data, technology, and people meet. Prior to joining DS, Kavita held senior roles at Commonwealth Bank, Qantas, and Suncorp. And I have worked plenty with Kavita, so welcome this afternoon, Kavita. Cool. Moving along to our special guests, Tim Fang. Tim leads business value consulting for MongoDB across EMEA and APAC, where his team helps customers understand the quantified business impact of choosing MongoDB. Previously, he held senior data and product roles at Salesforce, Uber, LinkedIn, as well as running two venture capital-backed startups. Welcome, Tim. Very, very excited to have you on this call and can't wait to hear what you have to say. And our final panelist, David Evans. David originates from the UK and has extensive background in digital and marketing technology, having applied his trade at global multinationals and more, to home being Telstra and 7-Eleven. His battle-hardened approach to data methodologies originated from establishing himself as a senior architect for Singtel's advertising division. David is currently a data platform architect working for Bendigo Bank, based at the Docklands office, supporting them across a range of initiatives, including Customer Master, MarTech Stack Uplift, and Gen AI capabilities. Thank you, David, and welcome everybody on this webinar. And I have plenty of questions for you. Cool. To get started, even as a software consulting company, we work with so many financial companies over the years, and when data is involved, especially these days when there's data and AI and machine learning involved, there are always some challenges that are industry agnostic, but some which are more unique to financial service institutions. So I'd like to start with a question around trends, and it's open to all, but perhaps I may just pass the question along to start. So my first question is, the investment of AI in the financial services industry is projected to hit $3.5 billion by 2025. This is just in Australia. Are there any key trends that you are seeing in AI adoption, and how do they align with unique challenges of the financial sector? Now, while this is an open question for all panelists, maybe I'll just request, say, maybe Tim, representing MongoDB, to start off.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say like there's three key things which we're recognizing right now. So the first one is around the basics. Like, is AI able to be used on the cloud with bank data? So there's a subtlety within here. It's not just about talking about the customer data, but about exposure of the source code. That's number one. So that's the first barrier you need to get over before you can start making use of the current Gen AI tools available in the market. The second part is about, right, you've got over that hurdle. Second part is about which model to choose. Which vendor are you currently in bed with? And so you need to make that choice, or you can even think about deploying open source on either your own infrastructure or your own private cloud. So that's the second part. So you need to be able to use AI. You need to choose your infrastructure and environment. And then the third one would be around, like, what are you going to use it for? And so that's the biggest talking point right now. What use cases? Is it going to be operational? Is it going to augment your current staff? Or is it actually going to like transform how you do certain roles? I know this is quite high level, but those are the three things that we're seeing when considering adoption in financial services.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Kavita, would you want to jump in?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the trends that we're observing, and this is from a product perspective, is looking at AI for productivity. So doing, say, quicker document analysis. So if someone was to go through a 45-page mortgage agreement, when AI could do it so quick, or finding the necessary documents and files. So using this internally to create like really advanced searches that point you in the direction of, say, documents and scans or specific pieces of information of what you're looking for. And using that for internal productivity is another trend, whether that's generating summaries of documents to help internal staff find data quicker, or just guide them as to where they could find the specific data they're looking for. And this is even before you talk about products that are used for interfacing with the customer, so giving customers the required support. So we're also seeing a big trend in using data and AI for internal productivity gains.
Yeah, I'd love a summary of the terms and conditions. I'm always agreeing, but I should get
100%, right? Yeah.
Thank you. How about yourself, Matt?
I think one of the key trends I've noticed is the improved fraud tooling that's AI is now offered in the space. Just looking at the stats, like in Australia, we've lost over 2.7 billion fraud in the last year, according to ACCC. Yeah. And using AI has made it much easier to identify fraudulent behavior faster than ever before. I know all the key banks in Australia are looking at leveraging payable biometrics, understanding the behavior of how customers use internet banking, and being able to prevent account takeovers or identify when customers might be being scammed socially. So ultimately, this can really help getting on tough things faster to help save customers and both financial institutions save money.
Yeah, no, I love it. Absolutely. And anything to help customers and secure environments. My next question, and again, it's around the trends and adoption, is, the biggest barrier to AI implementation is data readiness, especially in this new age of generative AI. I've often observed when we get onto clients and we want to do some Gen AI or ML work, and then we realize a few weeks in, now the data is not ready. So my question really is, are you seeing this even across financial institutions? And are there challenges? Are these challenges unique when you're preparing financial or customer data for AI? Maybe this time I'll start in the reverse order. Matt?
So I think one of the biggest barriers is really just understanding firstly what data you have, especially in financial institutions. There's years of legacy data just stored in old systems and so forth. Understanding who actually knows what the data does, what it is meant for, can normally be one of the biggest barriers. So having established some sort of data catalog to know what data you have can actually be used for something like training AI or language models. Is there PII data in there?
Yep.
Those are really important considerations that need to be factored in when assessing the quality of data.
Yep, absolutely. Kavita, have you experienced any challenges? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what the example you used really resonated with me, because even if an organization gets over the hurdle of having clean data, I think data still needs to be ready and still needs to be labeled to be used by analytics and machine learning and AI algorithms. And you're quite right. Like, I've observed this in the past where we'd have really ambitious leadership who would set up a squad of data engineers or data scientists. And sadly, the first few weeks or maybe a month will be labeling and annotating data. I think without the right data, you're never going to be able to have insights to, unleash the power of AI, essentially.
Yeah.
And this is a huge problem, especially with the challenges and dependencies that come with sourcing data from different systems and legacy systems. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. And Tim, I know with your experience, you've seen legacy data go through the years and companies evolve. You've surely come across, but do you have any thoughts on data readiness?
Yeah, I think one really exciting development in this space would be, we spoke about the challenges of like having data prepared or even labeled. In the past, you'd need to like go through a lot of manual effort to do that. Right now, the Gen AI tools available, even if you have a limited set of high quality prepared data, Gen AI tools are able to actually apply that same standard of labeling to a wider data set. So you've got a far broader, I guess, volume of data, even though it could be synthetic for you to start building models off, which could be reflective of a high quality data set. That's number one. And number two is like thinking about the use of vector databases. So a lot of us are used to, seeing rows and columns on an Excel spreadsheet and like thinking about labeling that one-on-one. But what about be able to use multimodal data? So you could be dependent on data coming out of your source systems, but now you can supplement that with documentation or user guides or something else that's generated internally, which might not be nicely formatted. But vector databases allows us to just evaluate all our corpuses, not just our data, on like an even keel. So that's where the new development I'm seeing of how financial services are taking advantage of like poor data quality. You flip the script and you build on top of a vector database and use that to be your retrieval mechanism.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And yeah, this brings us to, that was the part one about trends. And now we have a poll question for you. The first question is, and it should pop up on your screens. The first question is, what's your organization's biggest challenge when it comes to data? I'll just give maybe 10 seconds and then move on from there. All right. So now we're getting on to more in-depth questions of challenges that we faced, that I have faced, and I really, really want to know how people combat them. So Kavita, you've often dealt with multiple teams, very disparate parts of products, and you face significant challenges in integrating customer data from various sources. Have you seen integration issues impact AI initiatives, especially when this comes to a customer experience, when you want to personalize something for a customer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even if we take a step back, some of the challenges that I've seen is, You'd have a company, and financial services is no different, where you have a really ambitious AI and analytics roadmap, but it's missing that foundational piece of data strategy. And this probably involves not acknowledging the challenges and dependencies, and this is a great question, that come with leveraging data from different sources, especially legacy systems. In the poll that we just ran, I think was the top answer related to data quality. I think some organizations often realize that the data is not clean only after they start these ambitious programs. And even though the adage of, garbage in, garbage out, it sounds so cliche, but I think clean machine learning data is a prerequisite for any AI or analytics project, and the lack of data readiness. And we touched on being ready or being labeled. So without the right data, you're never going to have insights to actually drive meaningful and impactful personalization for your customers. So the way I imagine this as a business trying to build personalization by drawing on customer data, it may look like a really complex jigsaw puzzle, each piece representing different segments of customer data from different technology systems. Now, a success of an organization here will lie in piecing everything together to see the whole picture. And it's much more than just collecting data. It's about making sense of what this is telling you about your customers' preferences. And at the end of the day, we all want to build really valuable products that are very well loved by our customers. And having the right insights and the data to build this is kind of the secret sauce for having a personalization-based competitive edge in the market. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I've always faced this challenge of, we take very raw data, like in the form of files and CSVs and database streams, and then we deal with it somewhere else of how it needs to be modeled. And I've always advocated that it needs to be done right from the source. Otherwise, the quality, modeling it to domain becomes all unique challenges, and it's not something that the producer and the consumer of that data will know, or having that context shared across teams and the disparate sources is quite a challenge. So
yeah, but for personalization, you need to understand your customers' preferences, and you need the full picture.
Yeah.
We can't just look at one segment of what the customer is doing in either like one part of the business for financial services.
Yeah. So quality, modeling, governance, I feel you're right. Another cliche.
It's a jigsaw puzzle. You need everything. Yeah.
It needs to shift left. It can't be left much later. Awesome. All right. The way organizations are adopting AI these days is never like before. So let's talk about let's do another poll. Which of these following best describes your organization's adoption of AI? And it could be anything. It could even be trying to enable developer productivity with AI. So, yeah. All right. 5 more seconds on that question, and we will jump to the next theme. All right. Thank you, everyone. And this time I'm going to be talking about strategy. And my question to Tim: in my experience at clients, especially large financial institutions, we've always faced this challenge, like which team owns this data? Whom should I talk to? What's the approval to get access to this data? What's the protocol of this data? Is it an API? Is it a stream? And we spend more time on conversations trying to cross those barriers rather than get this data. Now, I'm sure that you've experienced the same. Any strategies that you've seen work well to break down these silos and perhaps allow consumers to make best use of this data?
Yeah, I'd say that it's probably have to look at least 2 layers of it. The problem of being able to get the right approval to access data, that will always be a long-standing issue. Sometimes it's by design. Some departments just don't want to share their data, unfortunately. But let's assume that we can get over that hurdle. So then there's probably 2 ways to think about it. So the first thing to think about is the layer at which you want to consolidate or allow people to collaborate on that data. And so you have to think about the fit for purpose. It's either going to be at the layer of the data warehouse where things are taken from a source system, and then you're trying to combine it in a way that makes sense for, I guess, more advanced data consumers, people who can, access the database, for instance.
Yeah.
So that's the first consideration. And this will determine the types of applications you'll be able to power, or the sorts of insights that can be delivered upstream. The number two would be, I guess, your actual like business users, like, how we talk about the business, it's them physically. So what about the reporting layers that they have access to that come out of maybe a data warehouse or could directly come from a database? So it's about working backwards. What are the needs of the business? What parts of the business work together the most that need to make decisions together? So when you make a dashboard, for instance, you need to be able to prepare, I guess, the right level of detail and granularity within the data warehouse in order to feed up to, let's say, a Tableau or a Power BI, for instance. So that's the next consideration that you need to make. All this is only possible, frankly, when the business can understand the value behind making a decision faster, making a high quality decision with all the information, because they are going to be the ultimate end users of whatever source system the data comes out of, and the push needs to come from them as much as it makes sense for us techies. So those are like the two ways that we should really think about data integration within a company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Business goals and customer value first, and yeah, maybe drive it from there. Thank you, Tim. It's not always about technology or culture and ways of working. The culture and the ways of working also play a big part, in data and AI. Any strategies that you've seen work well in building a data-driven culture within financial services organizations? And this time I will throw it to Matt.
Cool. Cheers, Gareth. Two key things come to mind thinking about this. The first one is establishing a very clear data governance, like understanding how data can be used within the business. And for most financial institutions in Australia, data locality is a key concern. You can't necessarily just ship data off to a different region, process it. A lot of it needs to be done within Australia to be within the rules of the law. So having that clear strategy for the data governance helps you really understand what data you've got, what teams can access it, even just the approvals to actually get access to that data as well. And from that, you can then understand what sort of data is allowed to be used in an AI context or to be referenced by a large language sort of model. The second key thing I wanted to hit on was actually, we've already came across the whole fact that data quality is an issue. The key thing is encourage experimentation and a fail fast sort of mentality. A lot of you are going to be trying to use AI in different ways, and in some cases, it's just not going to work. It might be that you then understand that you need to focus more on improving data quality. It's also fostering an environment where teams and individuals can feel safe to experiment using that sort of data. Especially in the engineering landscape, you ask any engineer with AI and everyone has a different perspective of how you could be used to help increase productivity, but also for in the banking sector, protecting customers and like as well. And also try not to do a big bang approach. Definitely using like an agile project methodology, like try and do small iterative sort of things, see where small improvements can be made and potentially lead to sort of high impact projects and encourage rapid prototyping.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, you said governance and very strict security across different sources, and I just recollected a very interesting, story from one of the from a conference where an organization plugged in some of these AI tools into their data, and people were allowed to ask open-ended questions. And one of the key questions they asked was like, how much does this one get paid every month? How much does my manager get paid every month? And I was like, uh-oh, I think yes, governance security is very, very critical. And perhaps even auditing of what the kind of questions that are being asked and should they be answered. So guardrails, auditing, but yeah, I totally align or agree with what you had to say there. Cool. Another poll for everyone on the call. what do you see as the biggest barrier to AI adoption in the financial services industry, or perhaps even in the organization that you're at? All right, and another 10 seconds on that one, and then we will move on. Wonderful. Okay, the next section has no particular theme. It's just going to be very, catered to every individual's sort of background. So while this one's around product, I think the question would be going to Kavita. How can financial institutions align their product strategy with AI and data initiatives while remaining compliant and meeting customer expectations?
Yeah, great question. I think first things first, not letting go of the basics. And I know this sounds really basic, but it's really important that we hold our customer at the center of a product strategy as we normally do as best practice. More often than not, sadly, what has happened now in the past is I've worked with organizations that love the potential that AI can bring. And what happens then is we tend to gloss over the customer need or the why or the vision that we're solving for. So I think as a principle for any good product strategy, just keeping customer insight and keeping the need at the center of the strategy, whether that is through behavioral analytics or understanding the product lifecycle analysis to help identify your trend to craft your product strategy, that's key. The second step is obviously creating the strategy that leverages these insights and preferences to drive personalized recommendations. When we're creating a holistic product plan, sometimes, and I think I'm going to use the example here of like a virtual assistant or a chatbot that we've all interacted with that can guide us through an online process or tell us where to go for a specific thing. One thing that often gets missed is when we're talking about a holistic plan from a product delivery perspective is model evaluation. So really including that as part of your strategy and having emphasis on model evaluation of an AI model, taking into account factors such as hallucination, biases, security, and performance. From a financial services standpoint, being compliant with regulatory advice that we're getting from APRA is critical. And APRA did give the green light for banks to experiment with AI to boost productivity and improve customer experience. And also their advice did state that they prefer AI to be used as a co-pilot and not on autopilot, which is kind of underlining the point that I was trying to make. So while we have AI as an enabler to drive all of this personalization and to drive like faster processes and perhaps even lead to cost reduction, just having that robust platform in place, having an eye on risk management guardrails and keeping an eye on the model as well. And I think like Matt mentioned before, a good product strategy we want to start small and have a pilot before we productionize something. It's always a cheaper problem to tweak an internal pilot, easier to solve something rather than having it go to production and it not performing like you want it to. So I think just some of the things to bear in mind there.
Yeah, thank you, Kavita. You mentioned, product thinking with AI has just gone through the roof. And I've often seen that, like these days when I'm interacting with product owners or, on the features that they're trying to build, AI has just taken their thinking to a different level. And I keep asking myself, how do I get there? But I will pick your brains in another forum on that. But Mayu, if you have something to share, I'd love it.
Yeah, I think one thing to not get caught up in is FOMO. It's very real when it comes to AI, especially in the last couple of years when AI was all over the news and every small business or company what they solved was investing in AI. So I think it's very easy to get caught up in saying, oh, I just want to implement something in AI, but also bring it back to what is the customer need and using AI as an enabler. I think that enablement piece is important rather than just trying to check a box and say, yep, I've built something AI for a customer, but keeping that customer need central.
Yep. And thank you very much. The next question, I cannot shy away from saying it's my favorite questions of all times. I absolutely love questions around scale, volume, and as a big fan of working backend distributed systems, I'm going to ask Tim, as a DB software as a service, and as with your background of Salesforce and Uber and LinkedIn, and coming from a consumer of these large scaled databases, and now being a software as a service, so my question is, when financial institutions design their data architectures, what should they keep in mind to ensure they can scale and adapt to future demands?
Yeah. I think there's probably three main considerations there. So first of all is about your overall flexibility of your underlying database to receive all the different payloads from different systems or different sources. So it's a trade-off between, in financial services, regulated environment, we need to have pretty well-defined schemas to ensure there's consistency in the data being collected. But that's a trade-off against the speed or agility you're able to integrate new data sources in order to augment or supplement something that's happening internally. So I think thinking about how flexible you want your underlying database to be able to respond to changes in architecture or changes within an application, that's a really important part. The second part is around the scalability problem. And that scalability problem is probably split into two areas. So the obvious one is horizontal scalability. As your service or your product grows and the number of users on it grows, you need to just scale up. You need to scale up the power of your computing. But that's a real opportunity cost in terms of literal economic cost. And so a really important consideration to make is the other angle, the horizontal scalability, making use of sharding. So right now you need to think about within your current underlying database and how your application is designed, how well does it support sharding and horizontal scalability? Because in terms of a cost basis, you might think the upfront management and the upfront implementation in order to get this going is going to be quite heavy, and you're going to balk at having to add you're going to have 3 shards, you're going to add 3 times as many nodes. It doesn't sound economic, but in the long run, it's actually going to be far more cost effective, because as you go through different steps as your product grows, horizontal scalability is going to be infinitely more expensive. So being able to manage that upfront and architecting your application sensibly, that's where we see our customers get the most, I guess, economic benefit when building out new estates.
Yeah. Total cost of ownership, always a question for anyone using large scale systems. Thank you, Tim. Very, very good insights there. We do have a few questions on Slido, and I think I'd like to pick one as it kind of coincides with my next question. And this time I'm going to check in with David. David, you're with Bendigo Bank, and with data privacy being a key concern, what strategies would you recommend for ensuring that sensitive financial data is safeguarded while also maintaining operational efficiency needed for AI adoption?
Okay, sorry I'm late. Can you hear me?
Yes, very
Good.
clear. Yeah.
Technology finally works. Yeah, it's a good question. So I've been Bendigo Bank for a couple of years now, and it's my first foray into the financial sector. To be honest, it's a very complicated space, unfortunately. And when it comes to banking, there's an overemphasis on risk compared to most other businesses. The introduction of new technology and processes has to always be assessed thoroughly by a large number of teams to identify and associate an appropriate risk rating before something can be put into production. And trust me, there's a lot of process in banking, particularly at Ben, and I'm sure the larger banks also have an awful lot of process involved as well. It does take, as a result, a bit of a while to get anything into production. When it comes to AI applications, I see the processes being no different to any other ordinary application. Every application these days needs data. When it comes to AI, it is becoming ubiquitous across all the applications. So whether you're installing like a Microsoft application or Adobe or something like that they're all going to be saying, we do AI, we've got machine learning inside of it. Most applications we are considering have that AI built in. When it comes to Gen AI, the use cases we are considering developing and have developed, they will be accurately assessed based on Ben's existing frameworks. We have a setup, an independent AI council to assess this new AI tech, because it becomes challenging not so much from a privacy perspective, but also from a bias perspective. Because as you can imagine, when it comes to AI, how do you know that what they're saying back to you is correct or not? That means we just need to then start looking at uplifting our testing frameworks and approach. The way we have to approach the development of AI apps is essentially classify them as being like a high, medium, or low risk. If they are directly customer impacting, then you consider those to be high. If they're customer impacting, but there's a workflow in there where someone can actually step in and look at things, then we'll probably put that more as a medium. And if it's just an internal use case where we're not obviously directly impacting the customer in any form, shape, or form, then you probably put that as a low. The low use cases are probably the code generation and searching. I really see AIs being, well, Gen AI particularly, to being that sort of an uplift to that search mechanism that you have, whether it's searching Confluence or whether you're searching SharePoint. So what we are seeing, though, from a Gen AI perspective, where we have seen successes, is with that ability to look at existing apps and ability to migrate from the old apps to a new technology modern stack. We are actively using Gen AI to write code to our own internal standards testing frameworks and to generate test data. For the high risk use cases, it would require a combination of technology stacks, such as, when someone's like logging in and they're trying to access Ben from a support perspective, the solution will have to incorporate a very robust identity service capability, which will then feed into the Gen AI service to correctly segment out the customer's details before we can allow the Gen AI bot to respond. Something we are trying to aspire to.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you, David. And I think that's a good segue to maybe Matt, where as an engineer on the ground, and implementing some of these features and engineering for them, what difficulties do you think financial services face balancing internal data sharing with security and compliance? And do you have any strategy to ensure cross-departmental accessibility and democratization while maintaining security and keeping everyone happy?
I think one of the first steps would be establishing a clear enterprise data catalog of all the data sets within the business. Understanding the metadata surrounding it, for example, what systems actually holding that data, but also identifying clear signals of what's the sensitivity of this data. Is it PII data stored in here, or is it safe for public consumption? Who owns it? But also, is there any usage restrictions on said data? Like, for example, can it only be processed within Australia if it's very confidential information? It's also important to sort of tag who's consuming that data because that can help identify who your SMEs are within the business and who to approach to actually understand more about the data set. And also it gives you the opportunity to actually tag the quality of the data set too. Is this suitable for being used in AI? Does it need more work because there's certain gaps within that particular data set? From there, that gives you the chance then to sort of set up like a centralized data repository or data lake. So that way you can set up guardrails for accessing data that security and InfoSec can sort of understand, identify, but also make it just so it's a common pattern within the organization to consume said information. Depending how you set up your data lake, it can be structured and unstructured data, but also it gives you the opportunity to leverage machine learning and doing big data analytics on that sort of data set. But also gives you a centralized way of just discovering data. For example, engineers could easily have some basic access to a data lake and just see what data is around there, and that could potentially help them on some of the business problems they're trying to solve. From a data masking point of view, that also gives you some sort of controls to, if you do store highly confidential data in that data lake, you can expose a view that has that mask, so that way you can't see personal details, but you can see other information that could be useful for what you're trying to work towards.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Matt. There's a question on Slido, and I think it kind of coincides. So yeah, how can you translate the complexities of data into business value? I feel there's a huge scope for impact, but it feels all very techy. And I think you addressed bits of it. I think it is techy. It has to be well cataloged, then be put into a lake, guardrail, accessibility controls before it can be used. But Any other, any other tips on how these complexities can be managed?
Depends on use case,
Yeah.
pretty much. Yeah. Get out there and do it is what a lot of the people in Bendigo Bank are just their opinions are in the business side, because you have data and that data happens to be privacy policy. What's the risk?
Yeah.
Just put it in an S3 bucket, convert it to vectors, and then get the Gen AI to connect to, and away you go. There's YouTube videos as of today that you can probably watch, where you can got Microsoft Copilot or Agent Builder from GCP, where they're basically saying this is the files that you want. We're connecting to it, vectorizing it, and oh look, you can now search over it, and it's all done in 15 minutes. Where's the blocker? It's only the blocker on a risk perspective when you start going, actually, when it comes to the customer, here's their financial data. Oh, that's a bit trickier. That's where, as I said, you need that identity service layer at the top to be able to segment the customer data properly. And as you can imagine, if you're proposing something to the customer which isn't quite accurate, then that's where you need to make sure your data is in good order. And it all comes down to your approach, your architectural approach from that point, because if you're domain-driven oriented at architecture design, then it will probably be a lot more efficient in terms of knowing how to resolve and resolve issues correctly. A centralized data architecture approach in this scenario will not work. You have to go for a federated architectural approach from when you start wanting to operate applications.
Yeah. Actually, we do have a question on AI tools, and I think I'll jump straight into it. How are you seeing generative AI tools being leveraged for productivity in financial services? And you spoke a lot about it. And I think also, yes, it straight starts with Copilot. But my question really is, what are the challenges that, institutions face when adopting these tools? And a follow-up, because we may have already addressed it, is, as large financial services, we are also dealing with perhaps the startups, who are a little more aggressive in using these tools and getting outcomes, but not as, I would put an asterisk, not as regulated or compliant or need to be that compliant. So is there sort of a balance that we need to strike? And, have you observed that, David?
Yeah, of course. It's all part of, risk. Banking, financial industry is all about risk. Any of the tool needs to be assessed correctly from a risk perspective. And then security be going, sorry, you can't send any of your data offshore. You want to make sure everything is where it is, and ideally in Australia. So that's where when we're obviously looking up these use cases, we need that bounded context around the execution and operational running of those applications. So the services I mentioned before on Copilot and Agent Builder, we can't use in financial industry just because they are all US located. One of the big challenges I'm seeing right now is when you do go to GCP and AWS, they're saying, we need Gen AI, we want to deliver Gen AI, we need graphics cards, GPUs, and they will turn around saying, sorry, we don't have any. So the infrastructure in Australia is not that point mature enough at the moment to be able to execute on a lot of the use cases. And we can only hope then in time that we'll be able to have the infrastructure in place for us to be able to then deliver on what we're trying to achieve. We are running at risk sometimes to be able to, but we accept those risks to be able to use the services that are offshore, but on the basis that we're not sending any sensitive data to those locations.
Yeah, data sovereignty. No, great. Thank you for that. I have a question that's on Slido, and I will pass it on to Tim. As MongoDB, I'm sure you have case studies or use cases that benefits company when using AI for financial. Any suggested use cases, Tim?
Yeah, funnily enough, it's great to have David on the call because our most recent case study was with Bendigo Bank. He made allusions to it, of how generative AI is helping to modernize applications effectively. And David, call BS on me if you think I'm making this up. But
no, it's our best use case. It's very good. Yeah.
Imagine having a monolithic app on an old framework, which only few people in the company can continue to develop new features on,
Or
and
not
be
at
able
all.
to, well, not at all. I think the service owners were being nice when they were explaining it through the pain points, and being able to re-architect that onto a modern frame, like a more modern framework, like a Node and Node, and being able to automate the code generation of taking, I guess, not just the underlying code base, but the stored procedures into like a new database technology, which is MongoDB, of course. Being able to automate that testing process, something amazing, like a user can click around on the screen and do what the base system was meant to do, and be able to translate that into test cases, and then be able to generate like Gherkin files to run through Cucumber to automate your testing process. You can validate the functionality of the newly modernized application. All of this I'm saying is basically the time that it takes for it all to happen once you have the code and the prompts in place. It's like the absolute game changer in the industry. So Bendigo Bank was our first successful use case, and actually the first one that we worked on. And right now we're working on about 10 similar customers globally doing the same thing within mainly the financial services space too. So I would say in summary, Gen AI can basically accelerate all the most painful things that you thought was never possible and help you re-architect and run applications which are actually going to meet the needs of your customers. And that to me is going to only have true benefits in the future, and how you can keep applications updated and the experiences that you can deliver. So it's absolutely revolutionary right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's revolutionary. It's a lot to learn, and yeah, every day I keep taking the 10 things I need to read and learn, and that keeps growing, and I don't find the time to get to it. But we have another Slido. Given deep fakes with Gen AI are only improving, and identity documents keep getting stolen, leaked, and we've seen this happen in the recent past. So how do you see the financial industry able to defend against identity fraud? It's an open question, but perhaps we'll start maybe with David.
Thank you very much. I believe I was reading an article not on this topic not too long back, where someone phoned up a bank in Singapore and impersonated the CFO using a deep fake, and was able to transfer something like $20 million. Yes, is a problem. And some of our executives came back from the US basically saying that if when it comes to telephone banking, you can impersonate someone else's voice very easily. So when it comes to this point, we start having to look at all sorts of different measures to try and be able to identify and detect. We can't just rely on username and password, because passwords, phishing scams and all sorts, that they're not reliable. We have to start looking at biometric and start looking at other ways of monitoring the customer's behavior to be able to identify any signals that would imply it could be not them. We also then have to start introducing other methods of communicating to the customer, just to make them aware of the activity that is going on the hope that those communication channels have not been, taken advantage of, essentially. Yeah. But it's a known problem. We are experiencing fraud, as every bank would experience fraud, and mitigating that fraud is a significant challenge to make sure the customer's experience is still good, but making sure we don't allow too much fraud in.
Yeah. Anybody else wants to jump right in?
Oh, that was a very impressive deepfake. I think this person who received the call, I remember reading this, she was on the call with like multiple people from the senior leadership team, which perception is reality. That probably seemed very like a legitimate ask. Yeah.
It's scary.
It is.
I think if anything, it shows the risk of not adopting AI for actually dealing with fraud prevention in general. Because most of these sort of scams are just getting more and more sophisticated as time goes by. And yeah, voice impersonation at the moment is a big one. I know a lot of banks rely on voice authentication just to approve larger transactions. So there needs to be new ways of exploring how to deal with that sort of scenario.
Love it. Principle of least privilege. If something doesn't need AI, perhaps don't add it. Thank you, Brad. How are we doing with time? Oh, we still have 5 minutes. Cool. My next question, and perhaps again open for all. What's the most important thing that you've observed in financial industries or services should be doing to establish robust data infrastructure, preparing the data, and scaling capabilities, perhaps even of people to support AI. So what would be the first thing you recommend your organization or a financial institution to do to get on this journey? And we'll start this time with Tim.
Yeah, I'd say with this current shift towards AI, you need to look at your current estate of applications to see which applications are going to be most affected or best augmented with AI. The reason I say that is you look at the underlying inputs that each of these applications receive and the size of those payloads. If there's like just a little bit of data going through, like less than like 4 kilobytes each time, I think you're fine. You don't have to re-architect too much if your current application is stable. But then when you consider what Gen AI is going to bring and the inputs that you're going to be gathering, so the inputs that you're going to put into the system are going to get larger and larger, particularly when you think about Gen AI, that those submission windows are just getting to like 128K or even higher these days. This is where I guess a traditional architecture, particularly on a relational database, will really struggle. So you have to really think about what your alternatives are in order to take in, I guess, the far higher data volume. And also the other side would be the trade-off to guess what that retrieval experience is going to be through search. David made an allusion to that also. And so like, how are you going to be able to handle far higher database sizes or document sizes in the MongoDB world? And how are you going to manage the indexing? How are you going to manage the overall performance of those applications? That to me is the #1 priority for organizations right now. Like, understand your estate of applications, figure out like the load that it's going to be put under in a new Gen AI world, and like respond to that proactively before you have customers talking about downtime or severe performance difficulties.
Yeah. Cool. Anybody else?
Yeah, I wanted to just touch on, I think it was mentioned before, like data literacy and investing in data literacy for your workforce. I think that's really important, and it's a skill that is really paramount in this day and age. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one thing to call out too is get buy-in from the leadership teams as well, like especially on the engineering front, enable engineers to experiment with using language models. For example, dealing with code bases like Tim alluded to earlier, like it's a great way of discovering how applications work, especially legacy applications that you might not have touched before, and understanding how best to sort of improve development practices by integrating that.
Yeah.
From an enterprise perspective, if you're trying to deliver AI applications, I see them as no different to ordinary applications. Applications just need data, they flow in, they flow out. From a enterprise data architecture principle, a lot of people obviously going on the basis that we need to pull in one big box. That it doesn't align well with me because I've been trying to do it for a decade. It's never worked out too well. It's controversial, but I'd fully adopt a domain-orientated approach with data mesh principles. At the moment you start going, I need everything in one big box, and you do all the compute in one big area, you're monolithic architecture. Unless you're adopting a data services, microservices architectural approach to delivering your use cases, you will you hit those limits. You'll deliver one use case, maybe two, and then you start going, I can't really scale to 3 or 4. Yeah, you really need to start looking at how you can move data from A to B across a web of separate applications, as opposed to trying to think about how do I put it in one big box.
Thank you, David. I was actually just going to ask you, you've got, a lot of background with Customer Master, MarTech Stack, and Gen AI. So how do you deal with volumes of data across different departments? But I think
my brain's frazzled. Oh, trust me, it's really complicated. I'm pretty swamped with meetings, to be honest, and it's like back-to-back meetings at the moment with marketing and then Gen AI a little bit after this afternoon as well. So it's for me, it's very challenging to try and stay on top of it all. But new technology keeps coming out, and I just absorb it because I love it. It's more of a passion thing for me, because when you start reading about Gen AI and what you can do with it, it's just very exciting at the same time. And then you have to start delving deep into sort of non-functionals around it that kind of scare a lot of people, that we just have to start working on how can we improve on the logging and supporting and maintaining those services moving forward that will keep various people happy. Because when it comes to generative AI and generative, it's you're making stuff up. How do you provide the confidence to people that it's going to be telling the right thing? It's very tricky.
Great. Thank you. And thank you to everyone on this call today. We have a couple of minutes left in this webinar. So do we have the survey slide? I think that's coming up. All right. I would highly request everyone to maybe just quickly rate this webinar. It's going to take maybe just a few seconds of your time and just a bunch of emojis. And thank you to all the panelists, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon for this webinar. We hope we've tried to answer all the questions. If not, we will follow up